The hab unit smelled of recycled air and fear, two constants in the underhive of Scintilla Prime that every resident learned to ignore the way you ignore your own heartbeat. Servius Kine sat on the edge of his sleeping pallet in the darkness, hands pressed flat against his thighs, concentrating on not moving, not thinking, not being. The meditation technique worked most nights. Most nights he could suppress the thing that lived inside his mind, the pressure that built behind his eyes like water against a failing dam, the sensation of being two people occupying one skull. Most nights he managed to remain invisible to the authorities who hunted people like him with the methodical patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Tonight was not most nights. The pressure had been building for weeks now, a gradual increase in psychic static that made his skull feel too small for his brain. He was 27 standard years old, a cargo hauler in the sub-level manufactorums where they processed raw materials into components for larger assembly operations somewhere in the hive above. His work was simple, mindless, the kind of labor that required a strong back and a willingness to ignore the chemical stench that never quite left your lungs. He had been doing it since he was 14, when his mother died of consumption and left him alone in a world that measured human value in productivity metrics. For 13 years, he had hidden what he was, the mutation that made him different, dangerous, heretical in the eyes of the Imperium. For 13 years, he had managed to pass as normal, unremarkable, unworthy of attention. The psychic abilities had manifested slowly, starting with intuition that proved too accurate, dreams that sometimes came true, moments when he knew things he should not know. At first he thought everyone experienced these things, that the stray thoughts that sometimes appeared in his mind fully formed were just unusually vivid imagination. By the time he understood what he was, understood that the Imperium executed psychers like him, or shipped them off to the black ships for processing into something useful and dead, it was too late to confess. Confession meant death or worse. Silence meant living with a secret that grew heavier every day, a burden that pressed down on his consciousness with increasing weight. He used his abilities sparingly, only in moments of absolute privacy when he was certain no one could observe. Small things, careful things, minor telekinesis to move objects when his hands were full, brief flashes of precognition that warned him about equipment malfunctions or supervisor inspections. Nothing dramatic enough to draw notice, nothing that could not be explained as coincidence or luck. He had rules, procedures, safeguards he never violated. Never use the abilities when other people were present. Never move anything heavier than a data slate. Never access another person's mind, no matter how tempting. Never, under any circumstances, allow himself to lose control. The rules had kept him alive and free for 13 years. They were failing now. The dreams had changed 3 weeks ago, where before his sleeping mind had wandered through the normal chaos of unconscious processing, memories and fears mixed with random sensory fragments. Now, his dreams were different. Vivid beyond anything he had experienced, they pulled him into spaces that felt more real than waking life. He found himself drifting through purple void space where impossible geometries twisted in ways that made his mind hurt, where distances meant nothing and time moved in spirals rather than straight lines. In these dreams, he saw shapes that he knew instinctively did not belong in real space, translucent forms with too many eyes, things that moved with purpose and intelligence that felt utterly alien to human consciousness. The first few times he woke from these visions, he dismissed them as stress responses, his overworked mind processing the constant fear of discovery through surreal nightmares. But they kept coming, growing stronger and more detailed with each occurrence. By the second week, he could no longer pretend they were simple dreams. These were something else, something that felt like it was reaching toward him from a place that existed outside normal reality. The whispers had started on the 20th day. Not voices exactly, but impressions of thought that pressed against the inside of his skull like fingers against wet cloth. He could not understand them in any linguistic sense, could not translate them into words or concepts that made sense in human terms. But he felt their meaning at some level, below conscious thought, felt the hunger that drove them, the cold purposefulness that reminded him of how he imagined a hunting animal might think if stripped of all emotion except the need to feed. They were looking for something. They were looking for him. His psychic emissions, normally suppressed to nearly undetectable levels through constant effort and mental discipline, had apparently been broadcasting stronger than he realized. The dreams were not dreams at all, he understood now. They were contact attempts, probes sent through the warp by something that had detected his presence from impossible distances, something that wanted to find him, to reach him, to establish connection with the unshielded psychic beacon that his untrained mind represented. Tonight, the pressure behind his eyes had become unbearable. He sat in darkness, breathing carefully through his nose, counting each inhalation and exhalation, trying to maintain the mental walls that separated his consciousness from the warp. The technique was failing. He could feel cracks forming in his self-control, hairline fractures in the dam that held back the psychic energy he spent every waking moment suppressing. The harder he tried to maintain control, the more the pressure built, a paradox that left him paralyzed with indecision. If he released the pressure gradually, he might be able to bleed off the excess energy without causing detectable disturbances. But gradual release required precise control, and his control was already compromised by exhaustion and fear. If he tried to continue suppressing everything, the dam might fail catastrophically, releasing all the accumulated energy in a single burst that would light up every psychic detector within light years. He was considering which terrible option to choose when the decision was made for him. A loud knock on his HAB unit door, aggressive and authoritative in the way that only law enforcement bothers to knock. His concentration shattered like glass. The psychic pressure that he had been containing with such desperate effort exploded outward in a wave of uncontrolled energy that he felt spreading through the warp like ripples across water. For just a moment, perhaps 2 or 3 seconds at most, Servius Kine's psychic presence burned bright enough to be detected across vast distances. A beacon flaring in the darkness, a signal calling out to things that hunted in the spaces between reality. A mistake that could not be unmade. The knock came again, louder this time. He stood on shaking legs, pulling on the stained coveralls that served as both work clothes and the only garments he owned. His hands trembled as he opened the door to find an Adeptus Arbitis officer standing in the corridor, a woman with the cold eyes of someone who had seen too much human misery to care about adding to it. She held a data slate displaying his work identification and schedule. Random inspection, she explained with the bored tone of someone who performed this duty hundreds of times per rotation. His HAB unit was due for compliance verification, standard procedure to ensure no one was engaging in activities that violated the countless regulations governing Underhive existence. She would need to examine his living space for contraband, unauthorized equipment, signs of sedition or heresy. He let her enter because refusing would have been suspicious, would have marked him for additional scrutiny that he could not afford. She moved through his tiny living space with practiced efficiency, checking behind the few pieces of furniture, opening the storage compartments, examining his meager possessions for anything that might indicate illegal activities. Her search was thorough but mechanical, the kind of routine procedure that found nothing because there was nothing to find. He owned almost nothing, possessed no contraband, kept no forbidden texts or heretical symbols. His only crime was being what he was, and that crime could not be detected by physical inspection. After 10 minutes, she finished her search, marked his file as compliant on her data slate, and left without saying anything beyond the standard formulaic statement about vigilance and duty to the Emperor. He closed the door behind her and stood in the darkness of his HAB unit, feeling the aftershocks of his psychic discharge still rippling through his awareness. The damage was done. For those few seconds when his control had failed, his mind had broadcast its presence with enough strength to be detected by anything capable of sensing psychic emanations. He had no way to know what had noticed, what might even now be turning its attention toward him. All he could do was try to restore his mental discipline, rebuild the walls that kept his abilities suppressed, and hope that his moment of weakness had gone unnoticed by anything dangerous. He did not sleep that night. He sat on his pallet in the darkness, maintaining the mental discipline that had failed him at the critical moment, feeling the exhaustion that came from hours of constant psychic suppression. As the industrial chronometers marked the slow passage of time toward morning, he told himself that everything would be fine, that his burst of psychic energy had probably dissipated harmlessly into the warp, that nothing had noticed, nothing was coming. He told himself these comfortable lies because the truth was too terrible to confront. The truth was that he had just broadcast his location to every predator that hunted in the Imperium. The truth was that something had almost certainly noticed. The truth was that his 13 years of successful hiding were over. Morning came with the harsh klaxon of the shift change, the sound that divided Underhive existence into work periods and rest periods with no consideration for actual sleep or recovery. Servius Kine dragged himself off his pallet, feeling exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. His head ached with a pressure that felt different from the psychic tension he had learned to recognize over years of suppression. This was something new, something that felt external rather than internal, a presence pressing against the outside of his consciousness like someone trying to force open a locked door. He ignored it the way he ignored everything else that threatened his survival, focusing instead on the immediate requirements of getting through another day. The walk to his workstation took him through corridors carved from the bedrock of Scintilla Prime's foundation, spaces that had existed since the hive's initial construction thousands of years ago. The walls were covered in industrial grime, the accumulated residue of centuries of manufacturing processes that had turned every surface into a uniform gray-black. Emergency lights provided just enough illumination to navigate, casting shadows that moved when you were not looking directly at them. Other workers passed him in silence, their faces showing the exhaustion that was universal among Underhive laborers, the expression of people who had stopped hoping for anything better than survival until the next shift. His workstation was in Manufactorum Block 7, a vast chamber filled with conveyor systems and sorting mechanisms that processed raw materials into categorized components. His job was to load cargo pallets onto automated transport systems, physical labor that required no skill beyond the ability to lift heavy objects repeatedly for 12-hour periods. The work was mindless enough that he could usually maintain his psychic discipline while performing it, the mechanical repetition actually helping to calm his mind through its sheer monotony. Today was different. Today every movement felt wrong, every action requiring conscious effort that should have been automatic. The pressure in his head was growing worse, not better, a sensation like water building behind a dam that had already developed cracks. He dropped a cargo container twice in the first hour, something he had not done since his first week on the job. His supervisor noticed, making a note on his data slate with the casual cruelty of someone whose power came from recording the failures of others. By midday, the pressure had become a constant presence that he could not ignore, no matter how hard he concentrated on the work. His vision was developing strange artifacts, brief flashes of movement at the edge of perception that vanished when he turned to look directly at them. Colors seemed brighter than they should be. Sounds carried echoes that did not make acoustic sense. The physical world was developing qualities it should not possess. Properties that suggested his psychic senses were bleeding through into his normal perception despite his best efforts at suppression. He knew what was happening, had read enough fragmentary accounts in forbidden texts to recognize the symptoms. His psychic abilities were no longer fully under his control. The constant suppression he had maintained for 13 years was failing, breaking down under some external pressure that he did not fully understand. The burst of psychic energy the previous night had apparently damaged something in his mental architecture, weakened the walls that separated his consciousness from the warp in ways he could not repair through simple concentration. The whispers returned during the afternoon shift, stronger and more insistent than they had been in his dreams. He could feel them now, even while fully awake, pressing against his thoughts with increasing urgency. They were closer than they had been. Distance in the warp did not work the same way as distance in real space, but he had the distinct impression that whatever was whispering to him had moved significantly nearer to his location. The sensation made his skin crawl, made him want to run somewhere, anywhere, though he knew rationally that physical flight would be meaningless against something that existed primarily in the Imperium. He finished his shift through sheer force of habit, his body going through the familiar motions while his mind struggled with the growing certainty that something terrible was about to happen. The walk back to his hab unit felt longer than usual, the corridors stretching out in ways that did not match his memory of their distances. He passed other workers who seemed not to notice anything strange, their faces showing the same exhaustion and apathy that was universal in the Underhive. He wondered if he was losing his mind, if the stress of hiding his nature for so many years had finally broken something fundamental in his consciousness. The alternative possibility, that his perceptions were accurate and something genuinely was approaching him through the warp, was somehow more disturbing than simple mental breakdown. Madness could be understood, categorized, even treated if you had access to proper medical facilities. What he was experiencing felt like something external, something deliberate, something that wanted to establish contact with him for purposes he could not begin to understand. He reached his hab unit as the shift change klaxons announced the evening rest period. Inside, the familiar space felt different, smaller somehow, as though the walls had moved inward while he was gone. The pressure in his head had become almost unbearable, a sensation like his skull was too small to contain his brain. He sat on his pallet and tried to center himself through breathing exercises, meditation techniques, mental discipline exercises, everything he had taught himself over years of hiding his nature. Nothing worked. The pressure continued to build, minute by minute, growing stronger with an inevitability that made resistance feel pointless. He knew with growing certainty that something was about to happen, that the slow approach he had been sensing for weeks was reaching its conclusion. Whatever had noticed his psychic beacon was no longer distant. It was here, or nearly here, separated from him by barriers that were becoming thinner with each passing moment. The moment of contact came without warning, sudden and absolute in a way that left no room for preparation or defense. He felt it like a hand closing around his consciousness, not painful exactly, but overwhelming, a presence that wrapped itself around his mind with the inexorable pressure of deep water. His psychic defenses, the mental walls he had spent 13 years building and maintaining, collapsed like paper structures in a storm. The presence flooded into his awareness, alien and vast, and utterly unlike anything he had imagined consciousness could feel like. It was not malicious in any sense he could understand, not angry or cruel or deliberately harmful. It was hungry. Hungry with a need that transcended anything as simple as physical appetite, a desire that existed at levels of reality he had no framework to comprehend. It wanted something from him, needed something that only he could provide, and it would take what it needed with the same casual inevitability that gravity pulls objects downward. He tried to resist. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to push back against the intrusion, to reclaim control over his own consciousness. The effort was completely futile. The presence in his mind was not something he could oppose through willpower or mental discipline. It was too large, too fundamentally other, operating according to rules that had nothing to do with human concepts of self or autonomy. His resistance strengthened the connection rather than weakening it, his psychic efforts creating resonances that the presence used to anchor itself more firmly to his consciousness. Within seconds of first contact, he understood with terrible clarity that he had already lost, that the battle for control of his mind had been decided before he even knew he was fighting. What remained was not victory or defeat, but simply the process of transformation, the gradual surrender of everything he was to something that wanted to use him for purposes beyond his comprehension. The physical symptoms began almost immediately. His body felt suddenly heavy, muscles losing coordination in ways that reminded him of the extreme exhaustion that followed double shifts. He tried to stand and found his legs would not support his weight properly, strength draining from his limbs like water through a sieve. He collapsed onto his pallet, not unconscious but unable to move effectively, paralyzed by something that was affecting his nervous system at levels below voluntary control. The presence in his mind was not merely psychic, he realized. It was beginning to affect his physical form, changing his body's responses in ways that served its needs rather than his. He felt his heart rate slowing, his breathing becoming shallow, his body's autonomous systems being overridden by something external. Not killing him, but changing him, preparing him for some purpose he could sense but not yet understand. The exhaustion deepened over the next hours, pulling him down into a state that was neither sleep nor waking but something between the two. He lay on his pallet, aware of his surroundings but unable to act, a passenger in his own body watching helplessly as something else began to take control. The presence in his mind had solidified into something that felt permanent, a weight pressing down on his consciousness with such force that he could barely maintain coherent thought. His awareness came in fragments now, moments of lucidity separated by gaps where time seemed to skip forward without explanation. During the lucid periods, he could still think, could still recognize himself as Servius Kine, cargo hauler, hidden psyker, victim of something he did not understand. During the gaps, something else was present, something that thought thoughts he could not follow, that wanted things he could not name, that used his eyes to see his surroundings with interest that felt completely alien. His skin began to change on the second day, or what he assumed was the second day, given that time had become difficult to track in his current state. The normal tan color that came from working under harsh industrial lighting was fading, being replaced by something paler, more translucent. When he managed to focus his eyes on his own hands during one of his lucid moments, he saw veins and bones visible through skin that had become paper-thin, almost transparent. The change was gradual, but relentless, his flesh taking on properties that looked more like jelly than human tissue. He tried to feel horror at this transformation, tried to access the fear that should have been overwhelming, but found those emotions muted, distant, as though they belonged to someone else. The presence in his mind was not merely controlling his body. It was changing his emotional responses, dampening feelings that might interfere with its purposes while allowing others to remain. He could still think, still observe, still recognize what was happening to him. He simply could not make himself care enough to resist effectively. Food and water stopped mattering somewhere around the third day. His body's need for sustenance had not disappeared, but the urgency of hunger and thirst had been somehow switched off, replaced by a diffuse awareness that these things were required but not immediately critical. The presence was keeping him alive, managing his biological functions with a precision that suggested intelligence and purpose. It needed him functional, needed his body intact and operational, needed him as some kind of vessel or container for purposes that were becoming clearer as the transformation progressed. He was being prepared, converted, made into something that could serve as a gateway between the warp and real space, a living door through which something could pass from the Imperium into physical reality. The worst part was that he remained aware throughout the process. The presence had not erased his consciousness or destroyed his sense of self. It had simply pushed him aside, made him into a spectator in his own existence, someone who could observe but not act, who could understand what was happening but could do nothing to prevent it. He watched through his own eyes as something else puppeteered his body through basic motions, standing him up, making him walk to his workstation, going through the mechanical routines of his job with enough competence to avoid drawing immediate attention. His co-workers noticed something was wrong. He could see their concerned glances, hear their whispered conversations about his appearance, his behavior, the way his eyes seemed to focus on nothing. But none of them intervened directly. None of them reported him to authorities. None of them wanted to get involved in problems that might bring official attention to their own precarious existence. By the fourth day, his flesh had taken on a distinctly unnatural quality, skin so pale and translucent that the structures beneath were clearly visible. His supervisor finally noticed, pulling him aside for a brief examination that ended with medical leave documentation and orders to report to a medical facility for evaluation. The presence controlling him accepted these instructions with mechanical compliance, walking his body back to his hab unit and lying him down on his pallet to wait. It was preparing for something. He could feel it. The transformation was approaching some kind of critical threshold, a moment when quantity would become quality, when the gradual changes that had been accumulating would suddenly manifest as something fundamentally different. He knew what was coming. He had read accounts in forbidden texts, fragmentary reports about warp entities that used psychers as anchors, creatures that needed living hosts to manifest in real space. Enslavers, they were called in the few documents that acknowledged their existence. Parasites that bonded with unshielded psychic minds and transformed their hosts into living gateways. The transformation entered its final stage on what he calculated was the 5th day since initial contact, though his time sense had become so unreliable that he could not be certain. His body began to change in ways that went beyond simple physical alteration. His flesh started to swell from within, tissue breaking down and reforming according to patterns that had nothing to do with human anatomy. He felt his internal organs shifting, bones softening, skin stretching beyond normal limits. The sensations were intense beyond anything he had experienced, overwhelming his nervous system with signals that his brain could not properly process. Pain would be too simple a word for what he felt. This was sensation at levels that human consciousness was not designed to handle. Information flooding into his awareness faster than his mind could integrate it. The presence kept him conscious through all of it, prevented him from retreating into unconsciousness or shock, forced him to remain aware as his body was systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to alien design. His consciousness fractured under the weight of what he was experiencing. Part of him remained Servius Kine, clinging desperately to memories of who he had been, while another part was dissolving into something else, becoming integrated with the presence that had taken residence in his mind. The boundary between self and other was breaking down, his identity bleeding into the alien intelligence that now shared his awareness. He experienced their thoughts directly now, understood their hunger, their purpose, their complete indifference to his suffering. They were not cruel. They were simply acting according to their nature, using available resources to achieve necessary goals. He was a resource, a tool, a means to an end that had nothing to do with human concerns about autonomy or consent. They needed a gateway. He could provide that gateway. His individual desires about the matter were irrelevant, as meaningless as asking a door whether it wished to be opened. His torso began to rupture on the 6th day, flesh tearing from within as something forced its way through the boundaries between dimensions. The pain transcended any capacity for rational thought, reducing his consciousness to a single endless scream that had no voice because his vocal cords no longer functioned properly. His chest cavity opened like a flower, ribs breaking and spreading outward, internal structures exposed to air they were never meant to touch. The presence kept him alive through this, maintained his biological functions through means that bypassed normal physiology, would not allow him to die even as his body was destroyed in service of their needs. His flesh formed an arch now, a pulsating framework of torn tissue and exposed bone that maintained structural integrity through forces that had nothing to do with normal physics. He had become a living doorway, a portal between the Imperium and real space, an opening through which things could pass. The first Enslaver emerged through his transformed body 3 hours after the rupture began. He felt it using him, felt something translucent and alien squeezing through the gateway his flesh had become, felt the terrible weight of its existence pressing against reality itself. Through his fragmenting consciousness, he perceived its form, a spheroid mass of semi-transparent tissue trailing multiple tentacles, face armored and arachnid with eyes that reflected nothing. It floated above the floor of his hab unit, moving with grace that seemed wrong in normal gravity. 2 more followed, each one forcing its way through his body in succession, each passage causing damage that would have killed him if he still operated according to normal biology. By the time the third Enslaver had emerged fully into real space, Servius Kine no longer existed as a discrete entity. What remained was something far more horrible than simple death. His consciousness still functioned, still perceived, still understood what had happened to him. But he was no longer human in any meaningful sense. He had become a permanent fixture, an architectural feature, a living gate that connected 2 realities. The rupture could not close because he was the rupture, his transformed flesh maintaining the opening through constant agony that would never end, because the Enslavers needed the portal to remain functional. They extended their psychic influence outward immediately, hungry for more hosts, seeking minds they could dominate and bodies they could use. Their range was limited to 50 meters in real space, a sphere of mental influence that could overpower any non-resistant consciousness within its boundaries. Servius's neighbors were the first victims, ordinary underhive workers who had the misfortune to live too close to ground zero. He felt them through the psychic network that now connected him to the Enslavers, felt the moment when their will vanished and something else took control. They retained all their knowledge, all their abilities, all their awareness, but their bodies were no longer theirs to command. The Enslavers puppeteered them with casual efficiency, using them to gather materials, defend the portal, locate more psychers who could be transformed into additional gateways. Each new thrall added another perspective to the network, another set of eyes and hands that the Enslavers could use, another fragment of awareness trapped within the collective nightmare that Servius had become the center of. The horror was exponential in its growth. The 3 Enslavers used their initial thralls to locate other unsanctioned psychers within range, unfortunate individuals who had been hiding their nature just as Servius had hidden his. These victims were brought to the hab unit, forced into proximity with the portal, subjected to the same parasitic bonding that had destroyed Servius's humanity. Each psyker underwent the same 75-hour transformation, the same brutal conversion from person into gateway, the same eternal agony of becoming a living door. Within 3 days, there were 5 portals in the immediate area. Within a week, there were 12. Each portal brought through more enslavers. Each enslaver could control up to 10 thralls. Each thrall could be used to capture more psychers or defend the growing infestation. The mathematics of expansion were brutal and inevitable, a geometric progression that would consume entire hab blocks if left unchecked. Servius experienced all of it through the psychic network. His consciousness, what remained of it, had become distributed across hundreds of minds. He saw through thrall eyes, felt their desperate attempts to resist, knew their horror as they were forced to do things their will rejected completely. Families were torn apart as members were enslaved and turned against each other. Parents were forced to deliver their children to the enslavers. Children were puppeteered to attack their parents. The thralls retained enough awareness to understand what they were doing, but not enough control to prevent it. They screamed silently within their own minds while their bodies performed actions they found utterly abhorrent. Servius felt every one of those screams, every moment of horror, every instant of despair. He had become a nexus of suffering, a collection point for all the pain the enslavers caused in their expansion. The Adeptus Arbits noticed the disturbance after 8 days, alerted by reports of missing persons and strange behavior in Manufactorum Block 7. A patrol was sent to investigate. 3 officers who entered the affected zone without understanding what awaited them. Servius felt them through the network, felt their minds vanish as they crossed the threshold into the enslavers' range, felt them become part of the collective nightmare. The enslavers used their patrol vehicle to extend their reach, loading it with thralls and sending it to adjacent blocks, spreading the infestation beyond the original 50-meter radius. The Arbits themselves, with their training and equipment and authority, became tools for the very threat they had been sent to contain. Word eventually reached someone who understood what was happening. An inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos on Scintilla Prime investigating unrelated matters recognized the pattern of reports for what they represented. Enslavers were extinction-level threats if allowed to spread unchecked, capable of consuming entire worlds in a matter of months. The response was immediate and absolute. No attempt at rescue, no consideration for the innocent victims, no negotiation or compromise. The affected zone was sealed, then purged with maximum force. Sisters of Battle and Imperial Guard units established a perimeter, then began the systematic elimination of everything within it. Fire and explosives and melter charges applied without mercy or hesitation. The thralls were sent forward in waves, forced by the enslavers to sacrifice themselves, protecting the portals, used as human shields in a battle they had no desire to fight. Servius felt every death through the network. Hundreds of minds connected to his, hundreds of people he had known as neighbors and co-workers, all dying in agony while their bodies were puppeteered toward meaningless slaughter. The enslavers demonstrated tactical intelligence in their defense, using thralls strategically, creating ambushes, adapting to Imperial tactics with disturbing speed. But numbers and determination eventually prevailed over alien cunning. The Imperial forces pushed forward, burning everything in their path, caring nothing for collateral damage or civilian casualties. Some enslavers fell to concentrated fire, their translucent bodies proving vulnerable to sustained weapons discharged despite their psychic powers. Others retreated deeper into the affected zone, protecting the portals that remained their primary strategic assets. The end came with melter charges placed directly against the living gates. Servius felt the approach of his destruction through the network, felt the Imperial forces clearing a path to his location, felt the final assault that would end his suffering. The melter charge, when it detonated, was not painful exactly. Pain requires a nervous system, and his nervous system had long since been subsumed into something that did not follow biological rules. What he felt was dissolution, the rapid breakdown of structures that had been maintaining his fragmentary consciousness, the collapse of the psychic architecture that kept him aware despite his transformation. For the first time since the initial contact 7 days ago, he felt something that might have been relief. The endless agony was ending. The trapped awareness that had been forced to remain conscious through every horror was finally being allowed to fade. The psychic network shattered as his portal was destroyed, all the enslaved minds suddenly freed from alien control. In his final moments of existence, Servius experienced the liberation of the surviving thralls, felt their minds return to their control, their relief at being themselves again mixing with their horror at remembering everything they had been forced to do. Then nothing. Silence, the absence of sensation, the end of suffering. What remained of Servius' kind ceased to exist, his consciousness finally released from the prison his body had become. Death was mercy after what he had experienced, oblivion preferable to any form of continued awareness. The portal closed with his destruction, the gateway between dimensions sealed by the elimination of the structure that had maintained it. The enslavers that had used him lost their anchor point in real space, forced to retreat back into the Imperium or be destroyed by Imperial forces. The infestation was contained at a cost of 2,314 lives, most of them innocent workers who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The survivors, 183 thralls who regained control too late to avoid participating in atrocities, were rounded up for interrogation. Most were executed within hours, despite having been unwilling participants in the horror, killed because inquisitorial doctrine demanded absolute certainty about warp contamination. A few were kept for study, destined to spend whatever remained of their lives in cells, living testaments to the dangers of psychic vulnerability. The entire Hab block was burned, then demolished, then blessed by the ecclesiarchy in rituals designed to cleanse the spiritual taint of Xenos corruption. Within a month, the area had been sealed and marked as forbidden territory, the memories of what had occurred there officially erased from public records. The Inquisitor filed a report that catalogued the incident with clinical detachment. Enslaver infestation originating from unsanctioned psyker, 17 portals neutralized, threat contained through rapid response and overwhelming force. Recommendation for increased surveillance of psychically sensitive populations. Note on the geometric progression patterns that made Enslaver threats particularly dangerous. Cold analysis of tactical performance, casualty ratios, resource expenditure. The human cost was present in the numbers but absent from the conclusions, reduced to statistics about efficiency and effectiveness. The report included no names, no individual stories, no acknowledgement that each casualty had been a person with history and relationships and value beyond their role as victim or threat. Servius Kine existed in the official record as Patient Zero, an unnamed psyker whose failure to report for black ship processing had resulted in predictable consequences. His entire life, 27 years of existence, was reduced to a lesson about the importance of following proper procedures regarding psychic mutations. The Inquisitor's final notation addressed the broader implications. Enslavers represented ongoing threats throughout the Imperium, drawn to psychic emanations like predators to blood. The Imperium needed psykers, could not function without astropaths and navigators, and sanctioned psykers to maintain interstellar communication and travel. But every psyker was a liability, a potential gateway for horrors from beyond. The black ships existed to identify and process psychic mutations, to either train individuals for useful service or eliminate them before they became threats. The system worked reasonably well given the scale of the problem, collecting perhaps 80% of manifesting psykers across the million worlds of the Imperium. The remaining 20%, individuals like Servius who escaped detection or chose to hide, represented vulnerabilities that no amount of vigilance could completely eliminate. Every hidden psyker was a potential enslaver host. Every unshielded mind was a beacon in the darkness. And in the Imperium, predators were always watching, always listening, always ready to take advantage of human weakness. The document ended with a reminder that had been included in inquisitorial reports for 10,000 years. The Enslavers had nearly destroyed the galaxy 60 million years ago, ending the civilization of the Old Ones in a catastrophic event known as the Enslaver Plague. They remained active in the current era, drifting through the warp, hunting for prey, ready to repeat the ancient horror if given opportunity. Humanity's psychic awakening made the species particularly vulnerable to this threat. Every generation saw more psykers born, more minds capable of touching the warp, more potential gateways for entities that viewed sapient consciousness as nothing more than food and tools. The Imperium's response to this threat was harsh but necessary. identification, training, or elimination. No other options could be tolerated. No compromises could be permitted. The cost of mercy was measured in worlds devoured and populations enslaved. Somewhere in the underhive of another hive world, on another planet in another sector, another unsanctioned psyker sat alone in darkness, trying to suppress abilities they did not ask for and could not control. They had hidden successfully for years, maintaining discipline, following rules, avoiding detection. They believed themselves safe, believed their precautions adequate, believed that careful behavior could protect them from the consequences of being what they were. They did not know that their psychic emanations were visible across vast distances to things that hunted in the warp. They did not know that their control was imperfect, that moments of stress or fear could cause psychic discharges that acted as beacons. They did not know that somewhere in the Imperium, 3 translucent shapes with trailing tentacles and mismatched eyes had detected their presence and begun the slow approach that would end in parasitic bonding. In approximately 53 hours, they would experience the first symptoms: persistent feeling of being watched, strange whispers at the edge of perception, dreams that felt too real. In 70 hours, they would experience initial contact, the moment when something external wrapped itself around their consciousness and began the process of transformation. In 125 hours, they would cease to exist as autonomous individuals, becoming living gateways through which horrors would enter real space. If they were fortunate, someone would notice the infestation quickly enough to contain it with minimal casualties. If they were unlucky, the geometric progression would continue long enough to threaten entire populations. Either way, they would experience every moment of the horror, trapped in awareness as their body was destroyed and their consciousness was distributed across a network of enslaved minds. They would become another patient zero, another statistic in inquisitorial reports, another demonstration of why the Imperium maintained such brutal policies regarding psychic mutation. The cycle was eternal. The threat was constant. The enslavers remained in the darkness between stars, drifting through currents of warp energy, patient as only beings outside normal time could be patient. They did not hate humanity. They did not seek destruction for its own sake. They were simply doing what their nature demanded, feeding on psychic energy and using available resources to establish presence in real space. That their feeding required the destruction of sapient consciousness was no more morally significant to them than human eating was to the animals humans consumed. They were part of the galaxy's ecosystem, predators filling a niche that had existed since before humanity's ancestors climbed down from trees. They would continue to exist long after humanity had become extinct, had transcended to something higher, or had devolved back into pre-psychic innocence. They were constants in a universe of change, unchanging horrors that waited in the dark for the light of unshielded minds to guide them home. In the ruins of Manufactorum Block 7, crews worked to remove the last traces of the infestation. Bodies were burned, structures demolished, soil excavated and replaced. The area would remain forbidden for decades, marked as cursed territory that sensible people avoided. Eventually, memory would fade, new generations would forget, pressure for living space would overcome superstition. The Forbidden Zone would be reclaimed, rebuilt, repopulated. New workers would live in hab units constructed over the ashes of the old. They would sleep in spaces where people had been transformed into monsters, where innocents had been enslaved and forced to commit atrocities, where a young man named Servius Kine had made the fatal mistake of losing control for just a moment. They would never know what had happened there. The official records would remain sealed in inquisitorial archives, available only to those with sufficient clearance and demonstrated need. The story would become local legend, details distorted through retelling until truth was indistinguishable from fiction. Eventually, even the legends would fade, leaving only vague unease, a sense that something terrible had once occurred without memory of specifics. But in the warp, nothing was ever truly forgotten. The psychic echoes of what had happened remained, imprinted on the fabric of the Imperium itself. The screams of 2,000 victims resonated across dimensions, their suffering adding to the endless background noise of human anguish that permeated the realm of souls. The enslavers that had participated in the feast retained memory of the event, incorporated the experience into their alien consciousness, learned from their mistakes in ways that would make them more effective predators next time. The galaxy turned. Time passed. Life continued. And in the darkness between stars, patient predators watched and waited for the next unshielded mind to light up the void. The next beacon calling them home, the next opportunity to feed on psychic light and establish presence in a reality that had never wanted them but could not keep them out. The cycle would continue. The threat would persist. The enslavers would remain, eternal as entropy, patient as death, waiting in the dark for humanity's next mistake.